Welcome to the Tambellini Group's New Normal in Higher Education. I'm Raechelle Clemmons, and joining me here today is Dr. Laura Gogia, Research Director for Learning Technologies and Student Success here at the Tambellini Group. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here with us today, Laura. So I'm really interested to talk about on student data privacy and the idea that there's been this growing conversation in recent years around surveillance and the implications for student privacy as more and more technologies are being integrated into the teaching learning process, especially technologies that like track or predict student activities in some way. So can you outline for us what some of the issues and concerns have been leading up to this year?
Yeah, I certainly can. There's a lot of issues. They tend to overlap. But if I were to divide them into groups, I'd probably start with just a general questioning of a culture of surveillance and whether that's something that we actually want to bring into higher ed in the classroom, but also just as a whole for a people, like not only in school, but also in the workforce.
Right.
And so when we think about that, it's like, when we think about it in higher ed, we're thinking mainly around the ideas of online proctoring, right? And so if we're thinking about it, is it actually really necessary? Is it necessary to have this surveillance going on when students are being assessed? And if you look at online proctoring websites, they're all saying that students cheat all the time. If we didn't have this, like 70, 80, 90%, maybe even 100% of students might be cheating. And quite frankly, the research is still kind of out on that. I mean, we know that students, some students are going to cheat face-to-face online, but if you look at the research, quite frankly, some studies suggest that students might cheat more in a face-to-face setting. Some might
Really?
cheat in I know, also an online setting. It's really a wash right now. We don't really know how big of a problem this is. So that's one of the things that critics of this surveillance bring up is like, we may be trying to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist in the way we think it does.
Right.
That we're being told it does.
Yeah,
So there's
that
that.
makes sense.
Yeah. And then there's also this idea of, do we really need to use a classroom management tool? Because that's what the surveillance is. Or could we design our courses and use pedagogy to help us move everyone into a space where cheating just wasn't something that you could do? And so you see this a lot. Like we have so many students, K-12 and higher ed, in remote instruction right now, because we are in a time of remote instruction and COVID, where the students are being given open notes assessments.
Right.
So it kind of negates the purpose of cheating, and it negates the purpose of surveillance. So another space that we're looking at is it actually necessary, in the sense of, can we design around it so that we don't have to surveil students?
Yeah, sure. More assessment of applied skills versus like sort of what do you know type of assessment, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that might be performance based, or it also could just be the same assessments. It's just you're asking a higher level question. You're asking application questions instead of just the facts that you could find in your notes. Let them have the notes. Yeah.
So it seems to me that those conversations, I mean, from what I've sort of seen and been engaged with, and those conversations were happening, but maybe in somewhat confined quarters. There was a group of really forward-thinking people. I can think of a number of them, and I know you can too, in the teaching and learning space who were raising these concerns, but it wasn't necessarily widespread conversation in the academy. I mean, not all faculty were talking or thinking about surveillance and assessment in this way. Has the pandemic changed this conversation at all, either in the nature of the conversation or who's having it, or both?
I think it's more who's having it and the urgency around it, in the sense that we have more faculty, more students, more surveillance going on at higher levels than we've ever had before. And I think that's pushing the conversation from a group of teaching and learning experts into a realm where students are also speaking up, for sure. Students and also faculty and also administrators who are attached to and seeing what students and faculty are concerned about. As far as moving from the more teaching and learning type arguments around, do we actually, just the critique of surveillance, we're seeing more and more the need to move into a conversation about equity and inclusiveness, because not only do we have concerns about the just do we want to not trust our students, and is that absolutely necessary? But the technology itself, specifically around like facial recognition, for example, and the connections that people of color, women, and specifically Black women, the facial recognition software just does not work as well. Yeah. And facial detection, with the idea of we're following gaze, we're following head movements, so is that a problem in terms of ableism?
Right.
And then, of course, just the fact that you're adding a layer of tech to the student experience. We've got to have a certain level of webcam, a certain level of microphone, and a certain stability of internet access, which, especially in a time of remote instruction where students can't go to dedicated testing centers, for example, or to the university library, or somewhere where they might feel a little bit more comfortable in their internet connection. They're at home because there's nowhere else to go. And so a little bit of internet instability can really change a testing experience.
Or they may not have internet at all, right? They might be on a mobile device, or, so access might be an extreme issue. Interesting. So I heard a couple of trends. So ASU, GSV, the summit happened over the last couple of weeks, their virtual summit. And there were a couple of trends that came out that seemed like they would impact this trend that we're talking about. And that was that ed tech investments are strong, and they're increasing. And that also AI is being embedded into, just about everything, right? A huge range of technology, from like student learning and retention, mapping skills to the workforce, and all sorts of different technologies, and looking to support all sorts of different outcomes. So from a genie in the bottle thing, I don't think we're putting this genie back in the bottle anytime soon. So with that in mind, what should students, faculty, technology leaders, and institutions really start thinking about and doing to better understand and address these types of student data privacy concerns?
Right. So first of all, from a tech leadership standpoint, definitely vetting software from a student experience position, and thinking about privacy, and looking at options across the board, but also pushing back on data retention. Because another issue here is, not only are you collecting all of this data, but some companies are keeping student data for a really long time, like years.
Like how long is it really?
Yeah. A default in some of these situations, the data is being kept for 5 years, up to 5 years. Wow. By default. That being said, institutions can negotiate, request, ask, demand. They can get that number down,
right?
Even down to a week. So asking the question and talking to service providers about how long are we keeping this data, and why, and can we get it down to a week or a couple of months? Right. That is definitely something in the purview of tech leaders. From a faculty perspective, and this kind of goes with the tech leaders as well, making sure that there's training around best practices in this use, not necessarily applying the highest level of surveillance to every quiz, for example. So looking at best practices, making sure that everybody has access to those, the types of IDs that are used, because oftentimes I think that's set by the institutions as well. Are you requiring a government ID, or will a student ID suffice? Making sure that you're defaulting to the lowest level of, identification and just general surveillance that you need to get the job done. So that's another thing to consider.
What about student agency? I mean, one of the ways that I feel like technology really, as a former technologist, that we really fail our students in how we use technology in academia is around agency, right? We don't tell them what we're collecting. We don't give them a lot of choice in the matter. We don't digital citizenship is something that I know, folks in certain quarters, again, are really strong advocates of, but I don't know that across the academy we think about communication skills, but we don't necessarily think about digital citizenship skills as sort of at that same level of university level competency. Is there something that we can suggest that folks work with their students on, or just the ways in which students should be thinking about, these types of technologies too?
So I think that being honest with students and open. I mean, right now when I'm looking at when I'm seeing syllabi or I'm seeing messaging to students, a lot of it is, oh, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Just make sure you have your light on and your room's clean and you have your ID ready and everything will be great. And you can understand that, right? Because, test anxiety is also a big thing. And then
Yeah.
we're adding this added layer of surveillance and just a gate that you have to go through to get to the test. So you can understand that sort of like it's all good. You're going to enjoy the experience. But
You'll you
yeah.
will surveil you and you'll love it.
Honestly, a lot of the messaging that I'm seeing out there is very much like that. Or just assuming that the students want to cheat and be like, oh, darn it, we know the fun part of online testing is that it's easy to cheat. It's shocking, but yeah,
Yeah.
you see that sort of messaging. So kind of shifting that messaging and some of the in so that you can actually have a honest conversation with the students about precisely what's going on, where the data is going. I mean, I think you're going to get more pushback from students, and maybe that's one of the reasons why it's been glossed over to begin
Right.
with. But that pushback is not necessarily a bad thing.
And the ability to opt out. I understand that that's also really important, right? That we give our students a choice to opt out from the technology and an alternate method in the same way that we would provide accessibility services for any other sort of, issue or concern, right? So it feels like a really critical point for us right now on these issues. And so I'm going to give you a crystal ball. And if you look into your crystal ball, what do you think the future holds? Does technology win and it's sort of like privacy be damned? Like, we don't care. We're all getting Ring doorbells. Or, do we reconsider the use of technology in teaching and learning? What do you think the new normal is going to look like?
I think it's going to look like something in the middle. I am hoping, because I'm an optimist, right? So I am hoping that this conversation, this pushback against just automatically doing surveillance at every level of assessment, I'm hoping that the pushback that we're seeing right now is going to work, and that we're not going to be using it for every single level of assessment. That we are going to see more of, for example, the open notes assessments and the pedagogical approaches to getting around this whole setup that we're putting students and faculty in. We're setting them up to fight each other instead of working together.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that the pushback we're seeing is going to lead to more open conversations, more faculty development, um, more organized student protest or dissent, or just, hey, can we have this conversation?
Right. And better tools, right? I mean, it's not that you're going to not have a need for, some verified assessment, but how do we make the tools as transparent and, I don't know, student data friendly as possible, privacy friendly, I should say, not student data friendly. They're very student data friendly,
Just
privacy
soaking it all
friendly.
in. Yeah. Yeah. And using it when it's necessary. Because
Yeah.
obviously there are situations where it's necessary, but making sure that you have a really good intentional reason for using it and that the
Yeah.
student's on board with that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Well, thank you, Laura, for visiting with me today and sharing your insights. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you next time on the new normal in higher ed.
Thank you.